I think what DeepSeek is mirror into challenging our existing beliefs as to what would lead to the results that we're hoping for, which pathways, and now that different pathways get us there. I was using this analogy with a defense partner who called me to understand what's going on. And so I explained to the person saying, imagine if you're a master samurai warrior and yes, you're 90 years old, you've spent the entire life perfecting the craft. Have a young, bright student and kid is like, you take the kid under your tutelage at like 12 or 13 and, 4 or 5 years, you bring them up to a really good capability. Who gets the credit? The teacher or the student, right? And the teacher, my student might claim, oh, you did that in 90 years. I can get close to you in like 4. That's the claim.
And we're live on the Venture to Victory podcast, where we look at the entrepreneurial journey from funding to exit. And we're totally excited today. We've got Rana Gujral in the house. And with everything that's going on in the world today in AI, all the explosive news over the past week or two that you can't get around, I really wanted to bring someone who was a thought leader in the space who could maybe explain for someone like me, a layman, or perhaps someone out there who's wondering, what's the difference between what DeepSeek's doing and LLMs, someone who could give us a kind of layman's perspective and bring us up to speed. So we're really pumped to have Rana on today. Now, first of all, how you doing, Rana? It's great to see you.
I'm doing fantastic. Thanks for having me on, Tim.
Awesome.
I appreciate that.
Awesome. We're so excited about the conversation today. So I want to do a little intro just to kind of tee up the viewing audience. So as I mentioned earlier, DeepSeek kind of happened a week or two ago. Equity markets just kind of went into a tizzy. Right before that had happened, you had Trump on TV with Larry Ellison and saw the SoftBank founder talking about the $500 billion commitment they're going to make into a data site infrastructure. And it seems like all of a sudden everything exploded. It was actually crazy. NVIDIA, I think, had the biggest single day stock loss in the history of the equity markets. I think it was something like 600 billion at one point. Of course, that's gone up and down and changed a lot since then. But that's really kind of an explosion that came from left field. And we're going to jump into that in a little bit. So Rana is currently the six-year CEO of Behavioral Signals, which is actually a CIA-based pioneer in cognitive AI. Before that, he had founded Ties, which was a SaaS platform that used machine learning to forecast commodity prices. That was successfully sold in 2016. Prior to that, he had turned a company called Cricut. This is an amazing story, from a $100 million loss on the throes of bankruptcy, ultimately to a successful turnaround that led to a $4.4 billion IPO. How that happens? Well, we're going to find out about it today. And he's also held a variety of tech and product positions at bellwether companies that we're all familiar with, like Kronos, Logitech, and he even launched Google TV, that is now Chrome Stick. So he's considered a thought leader in the space. He's a frequent keynote speaker at forums like TEDx and the World Economic Forum, and is both a contributor and columnist for, seems like, every famous publication that I used to subscribe to: Fast Company, Entrepreneur Mag, TechCrunch, and Forbes. He's a graduate degree from MIT and with a master's from University of Massachusetts, Lowell. So wow. Let's jump right into it. I'm excited, Rana. So the firestorm that happened last week, we talked about DeepSeek with its recent LM model, kind of their chat GPT equivalent. They're stating it only took them 2 months and $5 million versus the 100 to 200 million that OpenAI purportedly spent. Again, we touched earlier on all this infrastructure development that was being committed, including Saudi Arabia. Donald Trump and this team of tech guys were talking about it could eventually get up to $1 trillion. And then this firestorm happened. So I would love to start off with getting your perspective, maybe starting off with how you really view DeepSeek, what it is compared to the other, OpenAI, the AI models that are out there that we all play with, whether it's Grok or, ChatGPT, and, kind of your thoughts on, is this really something that's transformative, or is this just something that's being a little bit overhyped? And where did the big players go from here?
Yeah, that's a deep question. I mean, we've all been very enamored by what happened with the R1 launch and how it's performing, on various benchmarks. it's pretty fascinating. And I mean, when I started to look into it, I mean, there were a wide range of claims ranging from, yeah, this is a complete game changer that potentially renders the value of the leading labs such as OpenAI and Anthropic valueless from a perspective that, they've been able to do something completely disruptive, which has sort of in some ways caught up or, almost sort of eviscerated the lead these labs have had, to it's a complete scam. It's a lie. I mean, they have had access to 50,000 GPUs, which are probably, have sort of bypassed embargo of some sort, and that $5 million figure that they claim to use for training is a lie, etc. So, and I think that's what happens when something breaking sort of comes out. And the truth is that none of those things are true. And there are a few things that one needs to understand also what DeepSeek is. So first off, DeepSeek is a relatively small team built and led by a brilliant technologist, founder. And presumably, in terms of the work they've done, and this is not their first launch. I mean, they've launched other models in the past. This is the most recent launch. They are by far one of the premier labs. They're in the Ivy, right? So I put them next to, Anthropic and OpenAI and a few others out there. And what they've done with this model is in many ways breakthrough and unique and revolutionary and disruptive. And they've come up with a newer, novel approach of training. I can break it down. I mean, there's about 6 or 7 tenets to sort of how they did things differently, which are game changers. I mean, in many ways, it's a game changer because it allows everybody to think about potentially these newer approaches, which have largely been ignored, going away from potentially the traditional ones that were compute heavy to these newer approaches that are less compute intensive. And in just general, I mean, it's new innovation and the performance speaks for itself. And so I think, I expect to see more good stuff coming out of this lab. It has also, in many ways, leveled the playing field. And so I don't think, while, I very much like, and hope that we as a country, United States, continue to lead the AI revolution and innovation, because, I think it's best not just for us as a country, but I think it's best for the world that we do it rather than China does. But in this, in this landscape, it was never a good idea to sort of expect that, a handful of the players should necessarily be controlling the destiny of this opportunity. I mean, it's leveling a playing field is always good. It's better. I mean, I think we get there faster in a more more sort of scalable manner. And so this has put more of a spotlight on what's possible on the open source paradigm. And I'd say DeepSeek right now is probably the gold standard on open source. I mean, it's even better than, say, Llama and Claude, because even their weights are open source and some of their core reasoning models are open source. And so it's all open source. I mean, it's a full on a transparent engine that you could peek into it and understand exactly how it's done things. Now, a few sort of aspects, I'm not going to go into detail unless you want me to, but I mean, very high level, there's some untruths. I mean, so, the 6 million mark was mostly on the second training or the subsequent, the small model fine tuning, not necessarily in the data gathering. So if you look at, they probably spent maybe not as much as, say, OpenAI has, but, you do it for the first time, you're always going to spend more. But they did spend billions in data gathering and extraction and the whole distillation model, which is something, that has also come out and what OpenAI and Microsoft is now potentially claiming that, they stole our models to distillation, which, we can get into what that means. And, is that really a real claim or, how true that is? And, there's truth on both sides. But at the end of the day, I think, it's a smarter architecture. They did some things around reinforcement learning, which are just brilliant. And overall, I see this as a good thing, largely for the AI world, not necessarily as a good thing for a potentially CCP controlled entity to have caught up. That's a bad thing. That's a really, really bad thing.
Yeah.
So, there are a lot of nuances to it. It's not a simple answer.
Now, my understanding, and I'm not an AI expert, so I'm going to boil this down to a discussion you could have with maybe a 10th or 11th grader. But my understanding is rather than reinvest in all the learning that had to initially be done for the large LLMs, my idea, on the simplicity's sake, that what essentially was doing was going to the LLMs themselves, and rather than learning from scratch, it was just pinging them over and over and over again. So essentially, it's kind of like you have an old sage, a man of old wisdom that took years and years and years to develop all this knowledge. And then the next person coming along, instead of going and relearning all that from scratch and maybe doing it the same amount of time, just sat in a room with the old sage and just asked him a million questions and took whatever they could pull from them. So that's a simplistic way that I've come to understand it. How would you explain that? Because a lot of times you watch people on podcasts, they talk about it. Either they talk so highly technical, or they don't explain it at all. And I think a lot of us are really wondering, how is this even possible? Yeah.
What really went down? What is it? I'm going to try to keep it as non-technical as possible. But what you're talking about, there's a technical term for that. It's called distillation. And it's essentially, how you can shrink a model without necessarily incurring the training cost. And one has to understand, it's not new. It's not a novel technique. It's not something DeepSeek invented. It's a well-known technique in AI research, and it's commonly used for compressing large, expensive models into simpler, more smaller, efficient versions of those large models. And everybody uses it. OpenAI uses it, Microsoft, Facebook, for the Llama and other models. They all use it. It works in 3 simple steps. I'm grossly oversimplifying this, right? So first is you have to query the larger model. And this is where your sort of analogy of the wiser person comes in. So instead of training from the scratch, a smaller model, let's call it the student, learns by interacting with a much larger pre-trained model, let's call it the teacher, right? So, and the student model queries lots of them to the teacher and observes the outputs. Like, so for example, I was using this analogy with a defense partner who called me to understand what's going on. And so I explained to the person saying, imagine if you're a master samurai warrior and yes, you're 90 years old. You've spent the entire life perfecting the craft. You have a young, bright student, and kid is like, you take that kid under your tutelage at like 12 or 13 and, 4 or 5 years, you bring them up to a really good capability. Who gets the credit? The teacher or the student, right? And the teacher, my student might claim, oh, you did that in 90 years. I can get close to you in like 4. That's the claim, right? Yeah. And so it's a similar analogy. But so first is querying. The second is extracting patterns and generalizations. So rather than memorizing raw outputs, the student model, typically what it does is it captures the probability distributions, immediate reasoning, and various decision-making heuristics of the teacher model. And this means it's not just copying answers, but learning how to generate them in a structured way. So that's, there's a lot of intelligence there. And the third is reconstructing a similar model. So once enough highly qualified responses are gathered and through distillation, the student model trains itself to, eventually approximate the teacher's outputs, and then significantly reduce the training costs while achieving close to equal high performance. And so that's what they did, right? Google uses it, OpenAI uses it, Meta uses it. They all use distillation to create lighter, faster versions of their own models. Like, for example, Meta's Llama chat model leverages this. But the problem is that if you do it at scale without permission, it kind of turns into model extraction and in this case, maybe even data exfiltration, like from OpenAI API. And it's sort of like, borderline, violation of terms. You'd sort of like, this would be probably buried under some OpenAI, like, you can't do that. We wouldn't allow you to do it. But it's not illegal. The approach is not illegal. The model is not neither is it novel. So I think that's what they have done. And I think eventually, there's a lot of proof that they've done it. The evidence isn't clear yet. But there are 3 things that I think what to me leads to that, it's a valid claim. That one is that, it's very performant. The model of DeepSeek is very performant at a fraction of the cost, and it kind of looks like, that they did massive pre-training. Rather than doing massive pre-training from scratch, they have leveraged API queries from existing models. I mean, it's obvious because they haven't done the pre-training, and that's where the cost differential comes in. And the second is like the OpenAI's models came out months before R1, not DeepSeek's R1. And so, I mean, this wasn't like right away. And so they've had time to extract over the years, but they've now caught up. And I mean, it's also a known training issue, right? So it's like, it's something that everybody knows about. And if you don't have access to training, you don't have access to GPUs. If I were to put together a team and say, go do this, and you're like, give me the GPUs, I don't have the GPUs, I'm going to immediately think about distillation.
Yeah. So ironically, my son and I, my 12-year-old, had just watched The Last Samurai this weekend on television. So here's a question for you. Is DeepSeek the new old samurai? And are all these other startups going to essentially leverage the new old samurai in the same way? And does this become a repetitive thing where the time to create distillation just becomes shorter and shorter and less expensive?
I think what DeepSeek is a mirror into challenging our existing beliefs as to sort of, what would lead to the results that we're hoping for, which pathways, and now there are different pathways get us there. And also a reality check that maybe these embargoes and, these sort of approaches that we've had to sort of limit exposure to some of these capabilities are not good enough or will not work. And so you have to sort of rethink some of these things out of the box. Yeah.
Interesting.
Following up from DeepSeek's story, there was another story where a PhD researcher at Berkeley was able to create this on a laptop, right? So they were able to essentially replicate the DeepSeek model using $30 of compute. I think that was sort of like the claim to fame. And it was in the news all over. But I mean, it's okay. So, I mean, replication, and these sort of like approaches. But the thing is, like, one needs to understand is that, DeepSeek did 4 or 5 things that are truly, I'd say, commendable. I mean, there's certain approaches. We can get into that if you want to. But I mean, those things are really revolutionary. And I think, there's some things that I'd say, everybody sort of taking a look at that and say, oh, that's a brilliant approach. I mean, the team is really rock solid. It's a legit team. It's not a bunch of like, just sort of like, it's not like a marketing media by CCP. I mean, I think there's some things there that are real.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there's more to come on that. I'm sure the venture community is talking about it because, you make an investment of X amount of dollars with an expected return, and all of a sudden someone just 10X's you seemingly in less than a year. That's going to change the calculation for how you invest in this stuff in the future. It also got me thinking a little bit about Moore's Law in general, the use of AI, whether it's in coding, chip design, whatever, is Moore's Law, which, we've, to boil it down to a thumbnail, the rate at which computing power doubles every 18 months. That's kind of the rule of thumb people talk about. Do you think Moore's Law with AI is going to be kind of an old way of measuring things, that essentially it's a dead man walking?
I think, in some ways, yes, AI has disrupted and in many ways accelerated Moore's Law, but in a way that challenges the original premise rather than rendering it obsolete. Right. Yeah. I mean, I think that's the difference. So I think, the law sort of predicted that the density, the transistor density would double approximately every 2 years. Yeah. And it has faced, that has faced increasing physical and economic limitations. Yeah. However, what AI has done is it changed the game in other ways, right? So one is sort of like, okay, so the existing hardware, even if the density doesn't change, I mean, AI can optimize the existing hardware, right? And so like, with the traditional semiconductor scaling has slowed. It hasn't really, scaled as Moore's Law said it would. I mean, sort of it seems to be like slowing. But the newer wave of hardware specialization that extends the computational growth beyond the Moore's Law. So it's not even, not only just caught up, it kept up to it, but also, accelerated that. And that's where the, GPUs and TPUs are coming in. I mean, they've significantly improved the compute power. And,
Yeah.
now the neuromorphic computing and AI accelerators, new architectures are coming in, especially the neuromorphic chips. I mean, I think it's just brilliant. Algorithmic efficiency, just doing more with software. I mean, like Transformers was a game changer, sparse
Yeah.
computing. I mean, and now DeepSeek R1 has shown us other approaches like leverage sparsity and distillation, reduce the number of flops per operation. Um, there's a lot. I mean, and then there's the AI assisted chip design, right? So that's
Yeah.
what you're sort of seeing now. So you probably heard that in the news, right? So now AI is designing its own hardware. It's accelerating innovation by sort of coming with newer approaches. And both Google and OpenAI have developed AI models that optimize chip layouts far faster than human engineers. And I mean, there's lithography, generative design. All of these things are software driven, AI driven, and they're sort of like you say, okay, so if the physical density of the semiconductor may have slowed. That's not scaling as much, but everything else is rendering that goal maybe not that important at this point.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm going to take it as Moore's law will exist, but like you said, instead of being 18 months, it may drop down to 12 and then 6, and who knows at the rate of change. I feel personally like every day I open a newsletter and something's fundamentally changed. It's literally every single week. I mean, I've never seen anything move at this pace, and it's a struggle. Sometimes I feel like I'm a pinball going back and forth, just trying to figure out what application I want to use, how to apply these things, where to invest, all these different
Things are
issues.
happening
So
really, really
yeah,
fast. In fact,
yeah,
just over the weekend, I was looking at this deep research agent that OpenAI just launched. It's not available for regular users. It's only if you have the pro model. And I mean, just like you have the search button right now, and in the chat window, you have the deep research button in the chat window. And potentially it's like a mini researcher agent, right? So you can give it a research topic and like, I'm looking into that, and it does fully transparent line by line reasoning, and it discloses its reasoning. It goes back, goes back to its thinking mode. So it's not a typical sort of like the chat GPT output, which is like blurting out words as you sort of type. It says, let me think about this. I'll come back to you. And it
yeah,
works on it for 15 minutes, 20 minutes, and comes back with maybe like a research paper that's akin to somebody from a PhD from Stanford writing it. Is
incredible.
it doing original research? No. But if you're doing original research, I mean, it's probably going to shrink that time significantly. And so now more research is potentially possible. I mean, it's sort of that graph that, we sort of looked at, which is like, that gets to AGI, and then you get to singularity,
Yeah,
superintelligence, and it happens with this milestone. And technically, the OpenAI's internal definition of AGI transcends or corresponds to the ability to do aid original research. So technically, we're there. I mean,
yeah,
from that perspective. And so it's like stuff like, okay, so last 2 weeks ago, we were like enamored by DeepSeek. It's all news. Now we're looking at this agentic models that are coming out
I know
last
it's just
weekend, and
crazy.
it's crazy. Yeah, but
Yeah,
that's
I
what.
wonder. I wonder about some of the ethical issues here because, the way most people, including myself, would use typical search engines, you want you want to discover something. It could be something as simple as what's the right dose of Advil for a 12-year-old to take and how often, right? And so people go to YouTube or Google and you type in kind of a basic phrase and you get a bunch of, articles up and you try to read and then you infer from those what you believe the answer is. And with AI, it's so different now because people are literally, you pretend you're talking to someone who's going to get an answer for you. And I've just talked to so many people, and there's so much personal information where people, instead of saying, what's the right dose for a 13-year-old, they'll say, you want to be very specific and prompt. You'll say, I have a 13-year-old. The person has blah, blah, blah. The person goes to blah, blah, blah. And there's so much personal information that's being given kind of generally to get information back. And the ability to AI, and in the wrong hands, like CCP, for example, if there's something potentially dangerous there, or even a large tech company is going to use that to just, build a profile on you for advertising purposes. The ability to take that information now and pull together an entire life profile of that person is so beyond anything we've ever seen. And because
Yeah.
AI, because the right now the LLMs are not shooting advertising up at you every minute and tracking everything. You feel like, well, that's got to come, right? I mean, big companies want to make money, and the tendency to take information and then use it for our benefit, right? Whether it's to give us something they think we need. What are your thoughts on that?
I think my thoughts on that are, I think um, the big question there is consent,
Yeah.
because it's not always bad, right? I mean, there are a lot of use cases where I want to share my information to a personal confidant, right? So, for example, we're headed towards a world where we're going to have our AI doctor, we're going to have our AI lawyer, we're going to have an
Mm-hmm.
AI scribe and an AI assistant. That's not that far out. And we're going to have to trust these agents with information that we're probably not even going to trust our loved ones with, right? I mean, this is like private, confidential information. It's just you and I know this. And it helps me be more productive, maybe be more efficient. And so I think the problem always happens in these situations is I take that information and without my consent, use it for a different purpose,
Yeah.
whether that's marketing or building your business or, linking it to others. And now there's an invasion of privacy. And most people don't understand technology well enough to control that. And that's where they get taken advantage of. And there's a lot of
Mm-hmm.
misuse. So I think to me, like, I look at the ethics part of it in, controlling those dynamics versus, is it ethical to build these systems? Yeah, it's perfectly ethical to build these systems. These systems are, to enable you, help you,
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
and be more effective, more healthier, productive. But I think, yeah, I mean, it's like, the growth is happening so much and so fast, and that some of these gaps are accentuating. I mean, it's
Yeah.
just expanding at a rapid pace, and there's going to be a lot of pain, and there still is, right? I mean, at this point, and it's going to accelerate.
Yeah, I almost feel like there has to be some regulation in there to protect people, but the speed of change is happening so fast. By the time the regulatory environment, makes their move, they're already
Right.
years. The data's already been gathered, and they're so beyond where they need to be at that
These
point. It's almost a
regulatory
lost cause.
guidelines, yeah, these regulatory guidelines are very ineffective in catching up in terms of just the evolution of what they're talking about. So, for example, I mean, it may not necessarily. It may be. I mean, what's deemed as biometric is evolving, and
Yeah.
and so I think so that's changing, and what sort of deal as private data is evolving, and it's just like it's hard. I mean, regulations are always sort of like a catch up, and by the time you've caught up, it's a little bit too late. But it self regulates in the end, in my opinion.
Yeah, yeah. Well, listen, let's pivot for a minute away from AI. We could talk about this all day, and that is, of course, that's a more to come. Probably by the time we get off of this
Mhm.
podcast, the world's changed yet another iteration. But I want to talk about Cricut because you hear about turnarounds all the time, but it's rare for someone to be brought in where a company's losing $100 million and they're on the verge of bankruptcy, and they turn around the company and end up going public for $4.4 billion. Would love to hear a kind of an overview of that story, what the big challenges were, and how you kind of figured out how to solve this problem and have such a big victory in the end.
It was a Cricket was probably one of the most fascinating experiences of my career. Yeah, to better understand what went down there, one has to understand what the company actually did,
Yeah.
and still does. Cricut is a company that builds these incredible experiences and using technology to enable creativity, right? So these are products for DIYers who want to create things. And so it has a full-on design studio where you can visualize and design your digital creation. And then it
Mhm.
has these devices akin to a printer, form factor. That's something that you would sit on your desk, fairly relatively compact. That brings these creations to life, right? But unlike say a 3D printer, which is additive because it's adding
Mm-hmm.
resin and creating. This is like it's a subtractive, so it takes in materials and cuts, writes, and embosses. So think of this as like a sculptor in some ways, right? You give it some materials and it's going to create your creation out of it, but you design it. You own the art, you design, you own the creative aspect of it, and just going to bring it back, bring it to life. So the actual device, and it's a relatively complicated mechanical device, robotic device that had a lot of complexity. And the design studio obviously has a lot of complexity. The marketplace and ecosystem has a lot of complexity. And the business model had a lot of complexity. But this company, we took it on, and this was a long time back. This was obviously in not a new company. It was in business for 25 odd years. It was very successful, market leader, number one in the market, almost close to $500 million in sales. And then it made a series of bad moves, came down to a position where it was next to nothing in revenue, it was negative 100 million EBITDA, and, really worth zero. So when we were tapped to turn this around, one of the things that stood out, I mean, obviously in any turnaround, you're looking at, say, what are the obvious low-hanging fruits, right? And so there's always an aspect of financial engineering, prioritization, team building, focusing on the right priorities, tuning the GTM. Sure. All of those things come in. But when you hold that be deep, those things don't really matter as much as you think. I mean, you need something different.
It was heavily leveraged, I think you mentioned to me earlier.
Heavily leveraged, close to $400 million of debt.
Wow. And you and a partner were brought in specifically to try to turn around the ship.
Specifically Correct. To do this. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the big lining on this very dark cloud was how passionate the consumer ecosystem was for this product category. The consumers who use this product didn't think of this product as a product. They thought of this as a family member. It was sort of like his passion and love was so much about this category. And so we felt, okay, there's something there. I mean, you don't see that typically. I mean, it's sort of like the iPhone moment, right? Yeah. I mean, you don't see that with usually, your printer or or other products. And that's where the saving is. So, I mean, eventually what saved the company, long story short, was to visualize and envision an Uber experience, which, if can be delivered, would be first of its kind and would be a complete game changer and would be the dream come true for these consumers. The overall experience, like the hardware, software. And when you sort of dream it together, I mean, you put it in reality. I mean, obviously the answer is, well, okay, this is not possible. The reason it's not been done is it's not possible because these things, you can't mechanically have a mechanical device do this at this form factor and this cost and blah, blah, blah. And it's too complex, too hard. You need to invent new capabilities, etc. And so we're like, okay, well, there's not much you could do to make this thing worse. So let's try it. So you're, at the basement level already. So that was the vision that was laid out and focused on the product innovation, and that's what eventually worked and saved the company. So I think this story was purely about product innovation and doing it in a record speed of time. I think it's a combination of both of that, not just innovating over a decade, but innovating with a passionate group of people and executing manically towards those goals of innovation in a very, very, very condensed period of time. And so we did it in 24 months.
That's absolutely amazing. Did it require a lot of capital? Did you require additional capital to do that as well? Or
it did require additional capital, but not as much as one would think. I mean, it was mostly about finding believers who would give it a real good shot, and it just worked.
Yeah. I mean, what an amazing story. I had to think that people were knocking on your doors after that, just wanting to know, how on earth did you guys do this? What was the secret sauce? That's what I wondered.
And it's not a well-known category. It's not the the sexy product line. Not the. I mean, to be honest, I mean, when I first took a look at it, I was like, okay, wow. I mean, this is a really boring product. Like, people scrapbook and people do people does scrapbooking and who creates cards. And these boxes, I mean, that sounds to me like an incredible waste of time. I'm not very creative from that standpoint, right? I mean, I would never be caught creating a card myself. And so I could relate to that audience, which is like, why are you doing it? I mean, why is that? And then I realized that, the community that focuses on DIY is very passionate about that. For
Yeah.
them, it's a mode of expression. It's like therapy. It's their prime hobby, and they
Yeah.
express love through that. I mean, the handmade stuff. And,
Oh, yeah.
if you can bring sort of, tools that allow them to sort of, bring their vision to reality, I mean, that's a game changer. And so so a lot of that, I mean, I think it's still, I mean, in some ways, right? I mean, it's the antithesis of the Silicon Valley culture, right? Digitize everything. There's an app for everything,
Yeah.
automate
Yeah.
everything. Who's got time to, like, forget about sending cards, like, forget about making cards. Nobody's going to send you a card. You just like send a text message at this point.
I don't know if I'm sure you've been to a Michael's store before, but if you ever go into the Michael's store, the arts and craft chain, and you talk to the people that are working there and talk to the people that are purchasing things, which I've actually
Yes.
done from another business I was in at one point, doing some research for a company. They are so passionate about this. This is their life. They'll spend weekends and weekends. And when that final product is literally a testament or a memory to maybe somebody's life or the love for them, like you said, it's like it's like the iPhone moment of, wow, there's love to the core. This is a vocation. It's not just something. It's not a project they're doing. It's a vocation. And these people become known for being that. So you could be an ordinary person in every areas, but you're known for being that super creative person. And then all of a sudden, when someone wants a gift for somebody, like, you've got to talk to Jenny or whomever, right? Because they know how to pull all this stuff together. So it's just fascinating how sometimes the most unsexy industries can be super lucrative and exciting. And I'm sure for you, it was the experience of taking such a significant challenge, almost something that people probably expected, if not failure, recovery at significant losses, that type of thing. And to see that massive turnaround, I'm sure the board and everybody was, when it did go public, were you there? Were you ringing the bell? Were you live? Because that must have been
I was
an
not
incredible
there.
feeling.
I actually had this startup idea around building a vertical SaaS, and I was brewing in my head. So right after the turnaround was complete, I took that opportunity to go build that startup. But to your point, I mean, 100%. I mean, Michael's and Joanne's were the two prime retailers for a product
Yeah.
like this. Next time you're there, check out the Cricut aisle. It's probably one of the more creative things in Michael's and Joanne's, and obviously other retailers as well. But yeah, it's fairly exciting.
Outstanding. Well, look, this has been amazing. I love these two great stories. We could talk to you about them all day. One of the things I always like to do on the podcast, because a lot of young entrepreneurs that are kind of building their companies right now, some are doing great, some are struggling, some are going through that, that terminal moment where you're either going to live or die. In an AI world that's changing dramatically, what kind of advice would you give to aspiring founders who are looking to build careers in AI and entrepreneurship in a world that's changing so fast? Or any takeaways that you've kind of learned, or in other words, if you were starting all over today based on the collective knowledge you have, and you were 30 years old and just got some funding, what are some of the things that the kind of the roadblocks you try to avoid in some of the areas that would you go in to succeed?
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, we're probably looking at living in one of the most fascinating, I'd say, spectrum of history. I mean,
Sure.
literally looking at history being made in front of us. It's hard to realize when you're in the moment, right? I mean, if it's just like this close to your face, you don't see it, and that's kind of what's happening right now. The world's changing as we speak, and the young people, and especially the entrepreneurs, have a role to be part of that game or be on the sideline. I mean, my advice is that, you're sort of like, looking at a massive paradigm shift. Like, you once you get to certain points, I mean, it looks like we're kind of almost there, but at best, we're probably 1 to 2 years out from AGI. When that happens, at some point you get to ASI. And I mean, even before you get to ASI, game changes very, very quickly. A lot of the value systems and the businesses that we see today and use and I understand today will get disrupted and are being disrupted. I mean, they're going to be rendered obsolete. And that's the entrepreneurial opportunity. Understand, I'd say, whether whether you're doing finance or, go be a lawyer or you want to be a doctor, understand technology. You need to have a basic understanding of technology, even if you want to go into medicine. It was is my advice to the young people, because it's going to be a fundamental aspect of your living experience down the line.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
you have to literally sort of focus on that, and then, connect the dots, bring that aspect of understanding of the core models. You don't have to be a PhD level machine learning engineering expert, but you understand how it works broadly, big picture. Go connect it with your trades, see the problems that you have, and that's where the entrepreneurial opportunities are. I mean, the best opportunities are in intersecting worldviews. And so you have a certain training, and so you have a certain lens. And we all have our lenses, right? So, I mean, I talk to my physician friends and my other friends who are, lawyers and other trades. They have a very different worldview, a different lens. They see the same problem very differently. I can't see it that way. So if they're looking to solve it in that sense, I mean, that's where the opportunities are.
Yeah, I almost feel like one of the most important, I don't even call it a skill, but an attribute that you need to be successful is to be extremely open and excited about change. It's the one thing that you can't avoid anymore. It used to be based on your age and how long you're in an industry. You could kind of ride it out, adapt to a little bit of change. But the rate it's happening now, we really don't know where we're going to be. You said, become a lawyer. Well, yeah, but become a lawyer how? Like, how's that going to look? How's medicine going to look, right? Is it going to be virtual doctors? And so even if you go into a path where you believe you're going to have a career that could be 20 or 30 years, you really don't anymore. So the one absolute I would say about the new paradigm is rapid change. And so you have to develop almost an ethos for digging in and kind of having your warrior armor on to be able to manage and handle that. And those that embrace change and love change and look forward to it as an absolute are going to be successful. Those that are growing weary and tiresome and it's too much to keep up and they just want it to stop, it's not going to happen that way. So I'm pretty excited about it. Old dogs can still learn new tricks. I like to be on the edge of the envelope. It's so fun to talk to someone like you who really knows what he's talking to in AI and has great perspective. Rana, where can people find you if they want to reach out? Are you is LinkedIn a good spot? Is there an email? Like, what's the best way to reach out and make contact with you if someone
LinkedIn's a great
has an
spot.
opportunity?
Or, if it's non-work related, I mean, I'm fairly accessible. I mean, you could reach out to me on Instagram. It's an open profile. Send me a message if there's an interesting idea that you have. Or do it. LinkedIn generally gets spammed a lot, so it's just hard to find sometimes a really good message in there. I mean, I'm a little late to catch up on that. But again, I mean, or you could go to my webpage. I mean, there's a collect page. I mean, somebody monitors that. And so, I mean, if it's a interesting idea in there, it will eventually come to me. I will guarantee that I see it. So you could just do it that way.
All right. Well, it's really been an honor to have you on. I learned a lot today. I hope the audience learned a lot today. And we may have you back because one thing we know is AI is going to change, if not in 1 week, in 2 weeks. And we're going to be back to the drawing board, and we're going to need someone who's a thought leader to explain it all in layman terms as you so eloquently did for us today.
I'd love to have it back. Love to be back.
Thank you so much, Rana. And that is a wrap for today. Cheers.
Thank you, Tim.
The Venture to Victory podcast is provided by MatchStar Venture Search. If you're interested in any of our open executive roles or need help sourcing world-class talent for your company, check out our website at matchstar.com.